information on prevention, tools for a healthy lifestyle. Make little changes to be the best you. It's all here. A podcast empowering, informing, and motivating Bermuda to live well. Bermuda Health-Abets. Everything from A to Z on healthy living. Brought to you by the Health Promotion and Wellness Office of the Department of Health in collaboration with local health partners.
Welcome to another episode of Bermuda Health-Abets, a podcast where we discuss everything from A to Z on healthy living, with a mission of empowering, informing, and motivating Bermuda residents to live well. Welcome to our audience today. I'm your Cecille Spence, and I'm your host. And today we want to talk about emancipation and the implication of history and the impact on health. So our guest today is Nurse Cecille Simmons, and she's going to talk to us a bit on this topic. So Nurse Cecille is a retired nurse, a historian, and an author of a Bermuda cookbook. So Nurse Cecille, can you just give us a bit more about yourself and your background and, what you've done? Because you're retired, so I feel like you have a lot of...
Well, before I'm retired, I had various nurses. I should say good morning and thank you for having me. When I was working, mainly at the health department, although I've worked in all of the other establishments in Bermuda. But I saw that there was a need for local health education booklets for students. Okay. And so that's what I used to do as part of, I did work in the maternal health clinic, so I concentrated on books for adolescents, just small books that children, you could give out when you went to give a talk, books on contraception, books on women's health. So that's how I started doing health writing. And probably I've always liked to write because I went to a boarding school in Jamaica. So, you have to write, otherwise you don't know what's happening in the world. So I've always written. And so then I decided, I looked at the Bermuda cookbooks and I decided I think I could do that too. Not that I was an expert cook.
Right.
But I decided to do a cookbook, but to put them in order. So what we ate at Christmas, what we eat at Cup Match. And so I did that. So that was 35 years ago I did that. But when I was a district nurse, I got very interested in oral history taking. And another reason was I am the oldest of the grandchildren my grandparents had. So when I went to visit aunts and uncles, I didn't know what to talk to them about. I sat there. So I thought I'd say, well, what did you do at Christmas? And so as I got older, I began to record these things. So for 40 years, I've been doing oral histories, and I continue to do them. And that's how I do my writing, mainly for the Royal Gazette. They flatter me. They allow me to publish my articles. So I tend to write for the seasons and for the holidays.
Okay.
So, I've written for Cup Match because it's our freedom from emancipation. And so every year I will do Cup Match, but a different thing, different area. Okay. Sometimes I concentrate on the dress and the food, and sometimes I concentrate on the game. But I enjoy doing that. So I just did it like a community service sort of thing. Okay. And so I was really shocked in 2020 when I got the Queen's Certificate and Badge of Honor for my contribution to history.
That's amazing.
And then I also was a researcher for 30 years for the Bermuda National Trust. So what we do as a team, we studied all the historical homes in Bermuda. And so there's a book for every parish. So we've completed those books now. And so then I thought, what am I going to do with myself now? And so I write about different things in Bermuda, and I enjoy doing that. And last month, the National Trust gave me an award for recording the lives of Black unsung heroes. So I'm really proud of that.
I am honored to be sitting here with you today, really in all honesty. And as a person, as a person who is Bermudian, but I wasn't born here, and trying to find or grasp onto some history or something that tells you about who you are and your parents and basically their backgrounds and where they come from. And so I think that you're the perfect person to be having this conversation with
Thank
today.
you.
And you know what? You talked about cup match, and you
Yeah.
talked about, being a historian and writing the articles for the different times of year as it relates to Bermuda history. And that's exactly the reason, we're having this conversation today, because we recognize we have our traditions, we have our cuisines that we like to eat, and so the question is how do these things, affect us in terms of our history, and so I do want to get into our conversation, which is around, emancipation and the history of, how we got there as it relates to our diet and what we've eaten. Do you believe that the diet consumed by the enslaved and, impacts on our health today?
Well, yes, I think it does, and I feel quite certain that it does. If you think about it, we had that passage. Now, I must tell you another thing. The slaves that came to Bermuda did not come directly from Africa. They came from the other islands, Brazil and places like that.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, they didn't come directly here. But for those who did travel on that journey in the Middle Passage to these islands on the slave ships, they were underfed. They were, water maybe once a day. And
Oh, wow.
and sometimes there were 700 on one slave ship.
Oh, my
And
gosh.
about 25% of them died. Some, committed suicide by just jumping overboard. But now I'm not an authority on this subject. This is things that I've read and things that I know about. But they found that the slaves who survived this journey were those who had the ability to hold on to the water. And so they had a higher sodium content in their body, which allowed them to have little water, but they survived.
Oh, wow.
So today you will find that as black people, we have high blood pressure because of this genetic change that took place within this journey, along this
Right.
journey we had. And so I feel that as we were captured from Africa, we had a certain diet, high in vegetables and things like that. Very little meat usually, but our diet changed, and
Right.
with that change came our genetic change. Now that's my belief.
Right,
Yes.
and you know what? I do hope that we can bring more experts on to talk about. This is a very big discussion, very big topic, to be honest. And when we look at kind of the epigenetic effects on, us as a people, but so I do hope that we can bring someone on to speak a bit more to that.
Yes.
But that's very interesting, because if we can understand where we've come from or how we've been affected, we can then understand maybe some things we can do to potentially change that for even our future generations.
Yes.
I would hope so.
Yes, I think it can be changed.
Yes.
And I neglected to mention that of the slaves in the earlier years, 600 were captured in North America, so they were Native Americans.
Okay.
Now, today we find, in the reading, that many of the Native Americans suffer from diabetes.
Oh,
Now,
wow.
is this a genetic thing, or is it because their diet was so changed that they couldn't cope with the carbohydrates and things like that? And this made a change. And so, remember, the Native Americans would have mixed with the black enslaved people. So we are a mixture. We are a mixture of tribes. We don't know what what health conditions certain tribes had.
Right.
So that's another mystery.
Right.
Now in the Caribbean, their food is clearly outlined because there were indigenous people there. We had no indigenous people here.
In Bermuda, we had no indigenous people.
Indigenous people.
Okay.
And so you'll find the Jamaican diet, a lot of the things that are from the Arawaks and I think they're called the Keanos, but they are from those tribes. And of course, when the British came and the Spanish came, they overworked them, and they too died in the end. But we had many slaves who were moved from island to island. Now, the thing is, Bermuda was not a plantation island.
Right.
We were mainly trade and commerce. And
Trade and commerce.
Yes. So we
what's
had
the difference?
Well, because we traded. So we would go down to the West Indies. Now, let's say the Bermuda schooner would go up to Newfoundland.
Okay.
They would get the codfish, the salted fish, because it was used to feed the slaves. It was protein. It was cheap. The thing is, the codfish that came through us and through the islands was the second rate. The higher rate of codfish, salted cod, went to the European countries.
Okay.
So that developed our taste for salt, you know. Now, when we were working in a field, we were sweating and burning it off, but we're not working in the fields anymore.
Right.
You know? So,
you say working in the fields, and so, you've indicated in reference to the difference in, what we were required to do, or what our ancestors were required to do as slaves here in Bermuda versus places like other
Right.
Caribbean islands. When you say working in the fields, based on some of the research that you've done, have the Bermudian slaves have to
it was a different environment.
The same things?
What I also read is that the slaves who worked on the sugar plantations, and as I said, I lived in Jamaica, vast areas of cane growing. They said because they did that type of work and their diet, they were shorter than the Bermudian slaves.
Oh.
Those slaves from the Bahamas and Bermuda were taller. Once they'd been hit, they were taller.
Do you think that had anything to do with their diet?
Probably diet, lack of water. I think it would have had a lot to do with it. Now here, what you found out is that they were mainly, the slaves here were skilled carpenters, boat builders, and Bermuda, that's how Bermuda survived. So although we had farms, or we had plots, they were saying, lots of times that was left to the women slaves because the men were out sailing. So they had, I think it was something like 53 ships from Bermuda that were sailing up and down. So they would go down to the West Indies with the codfish. They'd come back with molasses and rum and cornmeal.
Okay.
Now, Bermuda's environment, they thought it would be conducive to tobacco, but it wasn't.
Okay.
It's too damp and humid. And so they concentrated, and then they were competing with the South of America. They were growing tobacco as well. So that was a crop that failed here.
Okay.
And so the growing was mainly to feed the people.
Okay.
And then when there was difficulty in getting things, it was difficult to survive. So when the Governor Reed came here, maybe 5 years after slavery, he said, these people are lazy. They need to be farming. And he said in an island they only had one plow and nobody wanted to use it because people just fed for their homes, their plantation houses, I'll call them. Although we didn't have plantations, we had thousands of slaves. And I asked, why? Why would we have thousands of slaves when we don't have big plantations? But they were all used as sailors, as skilled craftsmen. You have, let's say, pilot Jimmy Darrell. They celebrate him quite frequently. He was a slave, but he was an expert pilot. He knew the waters. So you find that many of the slaves were skilled pilots. They knew the waters. And so they would sail these ships down to the West Indies. And if the master felt like it, he'd buy a couple of more and bring up here. And that's how we got our slaves.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So I guess most Bermudians have descendants from the Caribbean.
Well, my husband and I did the ancestry. And the interesting thing is that we are fifth cousins. We didn't know that. We're fifth cousins. Now, he is not related to me on my Bermudian side of the family.
Okay.
He's related to me on my Jamaican side of the family. which was a baffler because he didn't have any
You didn't know
Jamaican
he had any
he
but
didn't
Jamaican
know that he had
background.
any.
Oh, wow.
And so, of course, that's another issue here with our health. We really don't mix enough, so we're sort of intermarrying. So he is my fifth cousin. So whatever genetic problems his family has, they are doubled when we marry.
Okay.
You see? So, but my son says he thinks he's pretty normal looking person. So.
And you know what? We know that when it comes to health and chronic disease, there are several factors that impact, our health.
Right.
And genetic predisposition is one
That's
of those
right,
things,
that's
right.
right.
And so that's why we are having this conversation. Is what are the implications? What is the impact that the history could have had? And so we talk about the difference in the slaves and the things that we had to do. So what were some of the things that we ate as slaves, based on your research in Bermuda versus some of the other Caribbean islands?
Well, everybody eats cornmeal.
Okay.
So they used to grow the corn, but of course, they didn't probably grow enough. So cornmeal was imported. Corn was imported. Cassava, that was used to feed slaves, and that came up from the West Indies. Now the English wouldn't have known how to prepare that, but it was the cultural background of the enslaved people who were familiar with that, and so that's how they got their bread. So even
from cassava?
Yeah, they would grate it and dry it, so they knew the dangers of it. Now, the Arawak Indians in Jamaica, they knew that cassava could be poisonous, and so when they were really upset about slavery, they drank the water of the cassava and committed suicide. Yeah.
Okay.
Cassava, you have to know how to manage it, how to do. So although we eat it here freely, it is highly poisonous if you don't
And
do.
I've heard this.
Didn't know
Yes.
that? Yeah, so when cassava, you grate it and you wash it, but the cassava growers here, they know, what has to be done. But when it's grated, it was left to dry, and then it was pounded into a flour, and that's how the enslaved and the slave masters, that's how they got their bread.
Oh, wow.
So had it not been for the enslaved, they wouldn't have known that.
And cassava is high in carbs?
Very high.
Okay.
But you see, you probably needed that. You needed that. But of course, you overindulge in it, and if that's all you're getting and you're hungry, and then you start to. That's why today we put on weight because, cassava pie now has butter, eggs, sugar, and all of that. Now, last Christmas I wrote an article on that, and nobody really knows how we got cassava pie because it's different from all the other islands.
Okay.
So they said the British brought it here, but how could they bring it here when they didn't know about cassava?
Okay.
So I question that, but I haven't found anybody who can tell me the real origins of it.
Okay.
So they said they mixed it with birds' eggs and they mixed it with this, but then the question is, where did the sugar come from that goes in it?
Right. But you know what I do, and this is opinion more so.
Right.
We're so creative, and a lot of our cultural practices today could be like, would have maybe evolved from things that we, did before and became the thing. Because I think if someone made bread from cassava, because in all honesty, I didn't, before you mentioned that, bread from cassava, I mean,
and then remember
you wouldn't have thought about
the
that.
cornbread, so that was from the ground corn.
Okay.
So they were able to do that. And then there were sweet potatoes. Now another thing the slaves ate were the head of the palmetto palm. They took off the head and they boiled it. So, but sometimes they ate it raw, but they boiled it, and evidently it was like cabbage. They did that. And then they ate the berries of the palmetto, and of course the cedar tree has berries, so you would get nutrition from the cedar berries.
So you can eat cedar berries?
You can, and Bermuda at that time was heavily forested. I mean, thousands and thousands of cedar trees. It was very heavily forested.
And now we're trying to preserve the cedar tree.
Yeah, But you see, they were cut down for shipbuilding because the cedar, provided superior wood for ships.
Oh, wow.
And because we were building ships for trading. But most of the things we got here were brought in. Then there were prickly pears. They have a pear that grows off of them. They ate that, and
the prickly pear grows off of which
you
tree?
see it around the beaches. It's like a cactus.
I've seen those in different places.
Has a yellow flower, and then it develops almost like a little pear. Okay. Well, about the size of a pear, and that can be eaten. But we just can be eaten. But I've never eaten it. But it can be eaten. Okay. So it was things like that. Now for protein, in Cyril Packwood's book, he talks of the enslaved going to wash the master's laundry in the sea, and there were so many fish that sometimes when they brought the clothes in, the fish were caught up with the clothes. Okay. So this was a bonus. They could have fish. And in whaling season, they would go out and hunt whales.
Really?
And well, of course, they had a master who was governing that behavior. But anyhow, they went out, they got the whales, and that provided meat for everyone, because whale meat, they say, is like beef. It was called sea beef. So for a period of time, they had that fresh beef. But of course, with the weather, things go off very quickly. So all of that would have had to have been eaten quickly. Turtles that swam around, they called turtles.
Really?
Yeah. They salted that meat. And
man.
Yeah.
Oh, no, this is so very interesting.
But salt was an important part of preserving.
I knew you were going to say that.
Yes, very important part. And then, horror of horrors, the things we eat are because they were thrown away from the master's table. So we eat the tails of the cow. Well, of course, they call it oxtail.
Okay.
So we ate that. And I remember my mother and father, they loved tongue. They would be having tongue sandwiches.
Oh, my gosh.
And for a period of my life, I didn't know any different. I thought it tasted pretty good, too. But as I got older, our diets changed.
Yes.
But you remember, they wouldn't want to be eating the tongue of the pig or the cow or whatever. We got the tongue. We also got the... they don't do that very much in Bermuda.
What?
I know my mother did it sometimes. Chitlings.
I was waiting for you to say that one too. I was like, wait.
Chitlings. My mother used to cook them. Oh Lord, the smell was horrible.
I hear.
But I don't think many Bermudians did that.
Yeah, I think that's more of an American.
Well, you know what the Bermudians did? They ate tripe.
What's
Which
tripe?
Tripe is the lining of the
intestines.
The lining of the stomach.
Okay.
So we ate that. The ears, the trotters, chicken feet. So, if you think of what we're eating today, we can see that we had to improvise,
What's interesting is that a lot of those things that you talk about being things that were thrown away and we had no choice, those are now all kind of like delicacies or cultural, meals. Like oxtail is a very common thing in the Caribbean and in the islands. Very common. And it's expensive to buy an oxtail meal now versus that was, imagining that was something that was being thrown away.
Right.
And I think if people can understand the history, that we might look at it differently, we might consume it differently. It might not be that it'll go away because it's a part of our heritage. Unfortunately, it's a part of, what we had access to.
But it's what makes us who we are today.
Yes. And, our history is our history, right? Knowing where you come from.
But it tells us also how creative we can be with very little.
Yes.
Yes. And I think that makes us, if we only talked about it, it makes us more interesting people.
I think so too. And honestly, for me, I feel like being informed or understanding a bit more about where you come from really does allow you to grow and be, into yourself, or be
And
culturally who you are a bit better,
and you understand why you do the things you
exactly.
do. Yeah.
So we talked about kind of like diabetes, the
Right.
implications of diabetes, especially like with the islands that had the sugarcane a bit more, and some of the we just said the indigenous population that had, bodies may have been adjusting to the high carb
That's right.
situation.
Yeah.
And with the islands, with us and the hypertension and the high salted like meats,
we have
like,
a taste for salt,
right? And so that could be, potentially a connection between that. But what about our dental health and how that may have connected?
Yeah, that I found that was something that I really didn't know about. Well, I mean, I know about it now, but my husband was a dental technician, his brother's a dentist. So I discovered that poor dental care, of course, causes periodontal disease. And so I was thinking the slaves would have had no dental care. They would have had, periodontal disease, the teeth would have dropped out. But the little clots that are formed from the back and the bacteria get into the bloodstream, and that's a reason for strokes and heart attacks. So that's why they're always saying, go and get your teeth clean. But in Bermuda today, many people can't afford that.
Right.
It's a luxury for them when it shouldn't be.
I agree.
And, often I look, and I just say, isn't there somewhere where people who can't afford it can get their teeth attended to? Because simply attending to the teeth would prevent the strokes and the heart attacks and the things that are tying up the hospital. So one thing impacts upon the other.
Yes, it's interesting
and
that
that is a concern as well. But today, before, during enslavement, you didn't have that. Nobody cared. And now, many people can't afford it.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's interesting that you say that, because even recently, just speaking to some dentists that we have in our community who are more comprehensive and holistic dentists,
Yes.
and they talk about the connection between our teeth and our oral flora and the impact on our actual physical bodies and even chronic diseases. So it's interesting that you talk about the relation between strokes and, heart attack. And this isn't the first time that I've heard it, but it's been more recent that I've heard more conversation around, the impact of dental as it relates to the whole body. So really, it's all interconnected.
And it has to start, with the children. So I know that the Ministry of Health has a dental program. I'm not sure how it operates today, but I know when my children, they're 53 and 48 now, but they were always able to go into the health department, at specific times and have their teeth clean. And then you had the dental health nurse who went out to the schools. But I don't know what goes on today, but it has to start from there,
Yes, early childhood.
And a lot of things that go on here have to start from
we do still have our dental nurses.
I'm sure they do. I'm sure they do.
Dental, is it? They do like health education around dental health, and they do still go into the schools. And we still have our dental program. And now, access, I do understand it can be challenging for in most doctors' offices because of the demand, right? Just even drawing on that, you said, we understand that you interview. You have been interviewing Black seniors for 40 years now. Can you tell us, how the diet of the seniors differ from maybe younger persons in Bermuda today?
Okay.
Like, is there a difference now?
Yeah, there's a difference. There's a difference. Usually, when I'm doing an oral history, sometimes I want the information, but I don't get into it right away. And I'll say, when you were a child, because you need to get people relaxed. What did you used to have for breakfast? And I've interviewed, the oldest person that I interview is Mr. Place. He's 108 this month.
Oh, wow.
But then most of the other people are in their 90s now.
Okay.
And they will all tell you they had cornmeal porridge. cornmeal, Quaker oats, cream of wheat. And, of course, in more recent times, they have the addition of sardines. And then one lady said they had chickens, and so they had chickens and duck eggs. I was surprised at that. But everyone said they had a cereal, a porridge, a cooked cereal.
Which is high in carbs, right?
That's what they had, right?
Okay.
It's high in carbs. But I know my mother-in-law, she always cooked a lot, but she always added condensed milk to it. Now, condensed milk is sweet and it's high in fat. But then I wondered, and they do that in Jamaica as well, I wondered if it was a lack of access to fresh milk. You see, so then you would use the condensed milk to do that.
That's interesting.
So I wasn't sure. But they all talked about a cooked cereal. Now, my husband and I, well, my husband's bigger into it than I am, we eat a cooked cereal. So sometimes we have cornmeal. Now, the other thing we'll have, which Bermudians wouldn't do, we have green banana porridge, which is traditionally Jamaican. And so
that's interesting.
It's a very smooth cereal. I mean, smoother than cream of wheat because you put it in the blender.
I can't imagine. So you cook it?
I cook that.
Okay.
Yeah. And then there's another cereal, which is peanut porridge.
Peanut porridge sounds nice.
Yeah, so you have to grate the peanuts, but in the husk, in the skin, not the shells, in the skin. And you can make a porridge that's high protein. You can do a porridge out of that. But that's how the cultures intertwine. Bermudians would eat the cornmeal, but Jamaica, of course, had the big banana plantations and ate green bananas. So that's what we do. But I found, I found the seniors are very interesting, and it's good to talk. So I have a set group of seniors that I call and I talk, and I saw one on Saturday, and she said, "You haven't called me for a while, and you need." But listen, this is what she said: "You need to think of what you need to ask, because I know I won't be here much longer."
Oh man, I'm sorry to hear that.
And she's right. The last lady who said that to me, I said, "Well, you better start chirping like a bird, girl. Let's get all this stuff down." And before I knew it, she too was gone. So I look at the list, and how many seniors in their 90s or hundreds that are still capable of having a conversation on whatever topic about old Bermuda. It's real interesting.
And these conversations I think are very important for us to understand, like I said before, what we can do today to try to impact our health or change how it might look genetically 100 years from now, right?
I'm going to interrupt here.
Yes.
And what they all tell me is that nobody ate dry cereal. That's a new thing. The cornflakes and things, that's a new thing. They didn't have that.
So that's the difference in what we younger people are eating.
That's the difference. We're eating the cooked cereal, I mean, I just imagine I put cream of wheat in front of my granddaughters. They'd be horrified. They're used to Cheerios and whatever else they have.
My daughter likes when I do porridge for her sometimes. I put nutmeg and cinnamon and a little bit of cream.
Yeah, how they strayed away from it, because as babies, that's the thing they were fed first, the cereals, But maybe the modern mother is busy and she doesn't have time to be doing a cooked cereal. It's quicker to do that.
I think also manufacturing and marketing and all of those things have a huge role to play in that. And we have had a robust discussion. Honestly, I think that we need more time, and I do think that we have to come back and have this conversation and maybe, bring on an expert that can speak to the genetic component of, how we were actually impacted genetically in reference to these different diets. And I thank you so much, Ms. Simmons.
Well, thank you for having
coming
me.
and having this conversation with us. And I look forward to us maybe, extending
it was
the
interesting.
conversation in
because
the
it was a
future.
challenge for me. It's not what I usually write about. It was a challenge. And it tells us that we need to know more about the diet of the Bermudian enslaved person.
Yes,
You know?
I
Yeah.
agree. So I think let's hopefully bring this discussion back again. I want to thank our audience for coming, for listening today, and of course Mrs. Simmons, who came to just give us, some of this information that I think is very important for us to know. Mrs. Simmons, do you have anything else or any type of one last kind of statement that you want to impart on our listeners for today before we go?
Well, I think that, as Bermuda, I know things are very expensive and food is very expensive, but we really need to look at our diet. We're so busy, we're having takeout food all the time, and it's high in sodium. So I will notice that if I go out to eat, my ankles will be swollen.
Okay.
And so that tells me that although it tasted great, really was it good for me? But everyone is busy and it's quicker, and the children love pizza and you're tired. And so that's what we've done. But, it's as though we have to plan ahead what we're going to prepare and introduce our children to the nutritious foods early.
Yes.
And I think a good thing is that many nurseries, I don't know if they only allow children to drink water.
Yes, we have
And-
nutrition policies,
And I
believe.
think that is really, really good. It's very important.
Okay.
And may I say also, drinking is important for seniors because we don't feel thirsty. When we're thirsty, we're dehydrated, so we need to be drinking water throughout the day.
Thank you so much for that
Okay.
wisdom. Can you tell us just one last thing? What's the name of your cookbook, and where can people find it?
Okay,
Just before you go.
It's the Bermuda Cookbook, and let's see, long story short, in St. George's and Robertson's Drugstore, and then there's the Book Mart, the Bermuda Bookstore.
Okay.
Interesting little gift shop called Fiddlesticks at Crystal Caves
Okay.
and Grotto Bay. Those are, and then there's the Little Drawbridge Dockyard. They
Okay.
sell my cookbook.
Okay.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing. Thank you so much for our listening
Thank
audience.
you for having me.
Yes.
It's been very interesting. Yeah, for me.
Thank you.
You have been listening to Bermuda Health-Abets. Please note, anything you heard on this podcast is not a substitute for visiting your healthcare provider. If you have a topic or want a question answered, please contact the Health Promotion and Wellness Office of the Department of Health by emailing healthpromotion@gov.bm or by calling 278-4900. Be sure to listen out for the next episode of Bermuda Health-Abets.